Okay, so tonight let's look at Chapter 8 here. The first important thing that happens is the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress, this time you have all 13 colonies who are represented there. And basically, you have still a desire here to, work things out, to, get the king and parliament to fix the problems that were happening, but at the same time continue to fight the British as they had been doing, starting with Lexington and Concord. And so you see kind of like a double standard type thing here happening. Some people who are thinking we can still reconcile, and others thinking that, possibly, we just need to continue fighting because things are not going to work out. Regardless, one of the most important things that they do is they select George Washington to lead the army. He actually doesn't get paid for this. And remember, we talked about Washington not being like a military genius or anything, but just having that ability to lead. And of course, the Continental Congress also says that they would supply the Continental Army that George Washington was being chosen to lead. Of course, he ended up being a very important and pivotal figure here. While the Second Continental Congress is trying to figure out the kind of the steps forward here, there's going to be kind of a tempo of warfare that continues to increase between April 1775 and July 1776. And you'll have some pretty able-bodied American leaders like Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen who will capture big British forts at Ticonderoga in upper New York. And then in June 1775, the colonists will seize Bunker Hill, which was a hill that kind of overlooked Boston. Now, while this is happening, Congress, they send what is called the Olive Branch Petition to George III. And basically this is saying, we want to work things out. We see that things have gone a little farther than we wanted to. We are still your loyal subjects. Hear us out. Just fix the problems we're asking you to fix, and we can work things out. In August, George sends a letter back to the Congress, and basically what he tells them is, you are still subjects of Britain, and essentially you are in the wrong, and anybody caught in open rebellion, as you are now, will be hung. And that really kind of sets the tone for the remainder of the war, and it's at that point, I think, where the Congress probably realizes that, the only way this is going to end is if one of us wins. And they decide at that point, time to put all of their efforts towards fighting against Britain. At Bunker Hill, one of the things that's going to happen here, and I already talked to you about the Hessians, so I don't feel the need to really talk about it again, is that, I don't even know where Bunker Hill is, it disappeared. What happens is that the Battle of Bunker Hill, which occurs on June 17th, 1775, the British are going to attack this hill overlooking Boston, and basically they're going to have to make 3 attacks, full frontal attacks up the hill. And the colonists who are defending the hill, they are going to eventually run out of ammunition, but they hurt the British so badly on the hill that it kind of said, even though the colonists lose, technically speaking, they still feel like, hey, look how much damage we inflicted on them and what we can do. Once again, it was more of like about the possibilities of beating the British. Canada will be not so successful. The colonists are hoping that they can go into Canada, which is kind of like a British stronghold, and this is going to be kind of the first time that they go on the offensive. So when they attack Canada, Benedict Arnold and Richard Montgomery are going to do pretty well. But what happens is when they launch this assault on Quebec, Montgomery is killed, Benedict Arnold gets wounded, and pretty much what you're going to see happening here is that this kind of ends this offensive in Canada, and they lose a lot of people trying to invade Canada, and after that the colonists retreat back into America down the St. Lawrence River. And pretty much this says that, there's no way that right now, at least, that the rebels are going to be able to dislodge Britain from the north. And fighting will then start to break out heavily in the south. And you're going to have a couple different battles that I'll kind of talk about in class a little bit, some things that are happening here. But one of the really important things that happens during the war that kind of clarifies the bid for independence is going to be Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet is really going to be what it takes to get the colonists to realize that what they're fighting for truly is independence and a republic. And Americans, it was almost like they still couldn't kind of break away that, they were British subjects. But then as they begin to read Common Sense by Thomas Paine, they begin to realize that, what Britain was doing was unjust in their eyes, and that essentially he had kind of broken those natural laws of protecting his people, therefore they should overthrow him. And so what you end up seeing is that the colonists kind of start to change their tune of, Thomas Paine is right, and, his kind of frank assertion that the king was essentially a brute and a tyrant might be true. And so the colonists will then kind of look to Thomas Paine and his writings as kind of the justification, and not only that, but kind of the objective for what they want out of the war. And it kind of brings to light the true cause, that it's independence, not reconciliation. So we're not here to fix things with Britain. We're here to completely get rid of Britain. And the other thing is that what you'll see here is that the idea of independence, that America should have foreign policy with other nations, and that foreign assistance will be essential to helping the colonies win this independence, is all going to be articulated by Thomas Paine. But what Thomas Paine also calls for is a republic. And this would be where the power, came from the people. And he argued that, all government officials, they wouldn't be appointed by a king. They would be appointed by the people, and if they didn't do their job, they could technically be removed by the people. And so this idea of republicanism that comes from classical Greece and Rome, and then we see it again in the Renaissance in Europe, this is really going to not only appeal to the colonists, but particularly people like the Whigs, who didn't like the power that the king and his advisors had. And basically what we're going to see here is that republicanism will become the objective. This is what Americans want to have at the conclusion of this revolution. And they thought that the important part was that, people were a collective, and that you work towards the collective good of the people, not, what the king wanted. And so what we're seeing here is that these ideas of, republicanism and representation in government and kind of the collective good and a rule by a majority is going to really kind of take hold in the colonies. Now, not everybody is going to agree with his republicanism. Some people felt that there should be a quote-unquote natural aristocracy, and this is kind of where you can possibly theorize that you have the idea of the Electoral College from, because they still wanted control to be in people's hands who they felt were more capable than the majority. And on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia kind of puts forth what will become the Declaration of Independence, and it's articulated by Jefferson, who kind of writes it. And basically, this is going to kind of state full out that, we're going to break free from Britain. And it says everything that King George III had done that was wrong, and they invoke natural rights, not just British rights, and pretty much justifying for why they are doing what they're going to do, and there's King George III. So what you end up with at the end here, you have now the sides kind of drawn, We've established why we're breaking from England, and you have two groups, loyalists and patriots. And loyalists obviously were those loyal to Britain, who were normally called Tories, and then you had patriots who fought against the British, normally called Whigs. And I kind of told you you're going to see, in terms of like demographics, there's a lot of people who are going to be neutral or loyalists. The patriots in the beginning, they're not going to be in very large numbers. But they begin what they call political education, so basically teaching people, talking about why they're doing what they're doing, advertising the kind of ideas of Thomas Paine. Loyalists, on the other hand, 16% of the population. A lot of families were split. I told you a lot of older people were loyalists. Younger people generally went over to the side of the patriots. A lot of loyalists were educated. They had money because they had business transactions with England, which meant it was important for them to keep that relationship together. Pretty much most of the Anglican clergy, with the exception of Virginia, also backed Britain at that point. And places like New York City, Charleston, Pennsylvania, New Jersey were more loyalist. And then, of course, New England, you're not going to have a whole lot of them because simply it's where most of the conflict is taking place. What you'll end up having is that loyalists will be treated pretty poorly. They're obviously regarded as traitors. A lot of them will have their homes and their property taken from them. They'll be beaten. Some will be imprisoned. Some will even be hung. But it's not going to be on a wide scale. A lot of them will simply just leave, and they'll go either to Britain or they'll go north to Canada. And Britain had a lot of these loyalists that they could have used during the war, and they never quite do it. In fact, they'll end up kind of by the end of the war turning some loyalists over the patriots simply because of the way they were handling the war. Washington, on the other hand, was dealing with a troop shortage of his own. The guys that he does get are not going to be particularly able. There are a lot of outcasts, criminals, guys who just don't have anything else to do, and they see this as a paycheck. Washington will lose his first battle at New York. The British will bombard New York, and patriots have to retreat. Washington will have to retreat to the Delaware River, and basically he's going to have to do whatever it takes to kind of keep his army together. Now, the British have a general named William Howe, who, by all accounts, liked the comforts of home, would prefer to spend his nights indoors with his mistress, who was actually married to one of his officers underneath him. And he doesn't really go after the Patriots aggressively enough, when he probably could have, and perhaps even beat Washington. And this will lead to Washington kind of doing probably one of his most, I guess you would say, like daring and military successes, which is crossing the Delaware River at Trenton on December 26, 1776, capturing 1,000 Hessian soldiers who were pretty much drunk because they were celebrating Christmas. A week later, he defeats a small British force at Princeton. And basically what we see here are a couple of well-needed victories to help improve morale among the Patriots. Meanwhile, General John Burgoyne is going to try a strategy of cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies, and he basically is going to push down Lake Champlain from Canada. And General Howe is supposed to meet him, but what happens is Howe takes too long to get there, and he will end up moving towards Philadelphia instead. And Burgoyne, on the other hand, is going to be he's going to be attacked by these basically mountain men with rifles who just kind of pick his guys off in the middle of the woods, and they kill his Indian guides, so he actually gets lost in the woods. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold is going to actually be kind of assembling this kind of small fledgling navy, and they'll fight on Lake Champlain, but they never really get anywhere. But he's going to hold Fort Ticonderoga, and like I said, Benedict Arnold will be a very important character here. And I think we will stop there.